Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from YourBlackWorld.com, and I was thinking today as I was watching this really interesting documentary by the Hughes brothers. The Hughes brothers are the brothers who made the movies Menace to Society and Dead Presidents. They're two really good filmmakers, and they made a documentary called American Pimp. And in the documentary American Pimp, I noticed that there were these interesting back and forths going on between pimps and prostitutes that really define these odd relationships. And somebody actually brought it to my attention. They actually sort of said something that made me think. They said actually that's sort of a father daughter interaction, and that's actually an interaction that is quite common in the black community. Where sometimes, and it was really deep when one of the pimps actually said that when I beat the woman or when I threaten to do whatever to her, that's a form of love to her because she believes that if you aren't willing to do that, then you must not care about her. So I really wanted to wrap my brain around some of this and try to understand it. So what I did was I reached out to someone who works with us at Your Black World, Miss Nomalanga Mhauli-Moses. She is an advocate and a mentor to young women. She also happens to be the reigning Mrs. Botswana, and that's Mrs. with an MRS for all the fellas that think you're going to send her email. Her husband will shut that down. And she also runs a website called successfulblackwoman.com, and she's also one of our editors. So, how are you today, Noma?
I'm doing great, boys. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you, thank you. Now, I wanted to ask you about this dynamic and whether or not people were just being silly by comparing, these unhealthy relationships to the relationships that exist in the black community. I wanted to talk to a woman who, you're married. You've thought a lot about these issues in terms of what families are looking for and what they need. What do you think about that when people compare the relationship between a pimp and a prostitute with what's sort of happening in the black community, with so many of us seeking out the wrong kinds of partners?
Well, boys, I think it has to do a lot with what we're seeing models for us. Who are we looking for in terms of role models? I'm sad to say that when I mentor young women and I talk to them, a lot of them and what they believe is normal in relationships isn't what I consider to be normal. So we have to establish what we are calling normal. Like for instance, some young women think that being beaten, being yelled at is normal, and unfortunately, that's because some of their homes, that's what's being modeled for them in their homes. And like I'm saying, a good thing with role modeling and mentoring is we get to establish a norm that is healthy and functional.
Hmm, interesting. So, I'll tell you this. One of the things that I've thought about, and this is something I've talked to my daughters about, is it seems that sometimes when the things that we see glamorized either from our friends or in our homes or on television, those are the things we end up seeking. And what it does is it seems to create this situation where you're rejecting every good opportunity you have for in a relationship because that person doesn't match up to the fantasy. And so every new so the truth is, like, I've always thought about it as a man. I've always said, I don't think that I could ever match up to what you are seeking if you're holding on to this fantasy. But the thing is that the next guy that you've never met, he could be that guy that fulfills that fantasy, right? So you kind of end up on this endless trail where you throw away what's good in your life because every new person seems that like they could be that person that gives you that thing that you're looking for that really doesn't exist. That maybe it's a Jay-Z, Beyonce type of thing, or when you hear women say, I want the guy who can go into the corporation and still take it to the street. And I'm like, well, so my thing had always been, I'm not a thug. I'm a scholar. That's what I'm going to be. That's who I am. I'm vulnerable. My job is not to beat you or to yell at you. My job is to love you. And it's interesting because you've seen cases where that's considered soft, or that's just like, oh, well, that's not a real man type of thing. And it's very interesting to me. It's not really meant to criticize people because people can choose whatever they want, but it makes me wonder if we should be looking for something more in our interactions with the opposite sex.
Well, definitely, boys, you said something very key. The first thing that you said was what I tell my daughters.
Mm.
Again, it's very important, I believe, for a young woman, if she's going to seek a healthy relationship with a man, to have a man in her life bounce ideas off of, talk to. And I'm talking about a normal man, not Dr. Huxtable on TV, not Jay-Z, not any other rapper. A normal man. And it helps if, again, that man cares about her and is looking out for her interests. Again, I emphasize over and over, it's good to have role models, it's good to have people in your community, in your family that you can look up to. A lot of young women who say, well, this is what I want in a relationship, they should be able to say, I saw my aunt, I saw my mom, I saw my mom and dad relating to each other. And if it's not mom and dad, my next door neighbor, something healthy and functional that you've seen that is realistic, that is not based on fantasy. And if those are the benchmarks that we're using, we can have healthy and functional relationships, and we can have those people as people who will advise us, guide us, lead us, and things can work. But if it's a fantasy, even if you wanted to ask Beyonce or whoever you see on TV for advice, she couldn't give it to you.
That's really interesting you say that, and I wonder, and maybe you can help me answer, figure this out. What do we say to those people who never had the role models? Maybe because the dad they didn't grow up with their father in the house, and maybe their mother didn't have healthy relationships or whatever. I mean, where do you think people can kind of begin that healing process?
Boys, you have to find it where you have to get it where you can find it. Like I said, it doesn't have to necessarily be your mom. It could be your aunt. It could be a next door neighbor.
Mm.
Healthy relationships do exist. You just have to seek them out. For me, for instance, one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to teach at the college level. My mom didn't do it. My dad didn't do it. But I reached out to people that I knew who had done it, and here I am doing it because I reached out to what I saw that I wanted and that was healthy, functional. Same thing with marriage. My mother's not always accessible to me, but I know a lot of people who've been married for 10, 20, 30 years. Those are my mentors. And again, it has to be people who I've seen doing it the way that I perceive as the right way, doing it the way that I think it should be done. It's not really that hard if you take it upon yourself to seek out those people who are doing it the way that maybe you want to do it or you want to see it done.
Hmm. Very interesting. All right. Well, and I'll throw in my 2 cents of advice. My advice is that if you want to learn how to make a relationship work, don't spend all your time reading Steve Harvey books. You can go buy Steve's book, whatever. But after you read that book, go read a book by somebody who was actually trained to understand how relationships work, because the more I see it, the more I see, all relationships have kind of a universal core to them, whether it's a corporate relationship, a friendship, or a relationship between parent and child. The core is similar in the sense that there's always the negotiation, the back and forth, the ability to forgive, the ability to communicate. All those things really come into play in any relationship. And I imagine that in a marriage, and I've never been married. You're the marriage expert here between the two of us. But my experience from what I've seen is that there is a functional necessity to continuously negotiate and be committed to something greater than your own ego. If you both are committed to making the relationship work, then there are many situations where you could stand up and you can give ultimatums, and you can hold the relationship over a cliff and threaten to throw it over. But that isn't going to make the relationship last. There are points where you have to stand down and say, my ego is telling me that I should do this, or my ego says I should never have to put up with that, or whatever. But if you want the relationship to work, your ego is going to have to be checked at the door. It seems that's the process. I mean, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think that oftentimes we think of relationships as two people, and you have to understand that people have good days and bad days. But what you should be protecting above all, in my opinion, and I believe that's one of the reasons I've stayed married, is you have to be protecting the relationship and recognize that the other person has flaws, you have flaws, but the relationship is what you're protecting, and balance that. Another thing is I can't emphasize enough, boys. Um, you need advice. You need people who can guide you, who have done it, who have walked the path. If you talk about Steve Harvey, from what I know about him, I think he's on marriage number 2. So clearly he's not the expert on how to make marriage work. And again, I have nothing against the brother, but you have to understand the difference between entertainment and solid information, and advice. And it's okay to be entertained by Steve Harvey. It's even entertaining to read what he thinks about relationships. But if a marriage was in crisis, I certainly wouldn't look to a Steve Harvey book. I would look to a person who's been married and has gone through a crisis in their marriage and overcome who specializes in relationships, a psychiatrist, counselor, who again has taken people through the path of crisis and they've come out of it with still staying in their solid marriage. It really, it seems like it seems so logical, but I've seen people look for advice from somebody who's been married a few times, and so clearly that person doesn't have the answer.
Well, maybe if enough trial and error is evidence that you've learned something, then maybe that's it. But I agree with you. I had a friend who I remember had been had been in her second divorce by the time she was 30 or 31, and it was really interesting because she felt that she didn't that there was nothing she could do better, that basically she knew everything she needed to know on how to conduct a healthy relationship. And I was thinking, well, I think that might be your first mistake right there. Maybe we have to admit that we're not perfect here, but then again, that's everybody. So I wasn't there to tell her like, oh, this is where you got it wrong. I was there to say that none of us knows everything, and really, to some extent, even as a scholar, I can say that the more you learn, the more you realize you need to go learn more. The more you realize how little you actually know. And I was looking over in this direction while you were talking, not because I was being rude, but because I was looking for a book that I'd read. As you know, we keep things pretty formal here on Your Black World. I can't find the book, but I'm gonna show it to people when I get a chance. It's called What Women Want Men to Know, and it was written by Barbara DeAngelis, and she's a clinical psychologist who's interviewed thousands of women, and that book was really educational for me because she actually has a chapter where she says, let's spend a day inside the mind of a woman, and it freaked me out. It was like going into outer space or something on some sort of acid trip or something. Like I was like, whoa, this is what women think. Oh my gosh, and here I was in my 30s when I read this, and I thought I knew all this. I thought I understood how women think, and I realized I didn't. So I had to humble myself and read this book and read it like I was a first grader and really try to understand what how women interpret the things you might say or do, etc. And the thing is, I know she wrote a companion book for women as well about men. And I think that if you want to understand the opposite sex and you want to get something from them, you want them to do something for you, whether you want to get someone, or you want someone that wants to marry you, or you want someone to love you, or you want someone to even sleep with you, or you want someone to do whatever, like the best way to get someone to do something that you want, honestly, and I'm speaking selfishly here, but I believe self-preservation is a driving factor for most human beings. I've learned that if you want someone to do something for you, the best approach is to do something for them, is to help figure out what they want and do an exchange. Life is quid pro quo for the most part. It's sad to say that it's that way. Like we want to believe, oh, someone should just love me for me, no matter who I am or how I am or what I do. That ain't gonna happen. People, if you get a decent mate, chances are, like when your husband married with the beauty queen who had all kinds of male suitors, it's not like he could just walk in and say, well, you should just want me because of who I am. No, he said, how can I make this woman happy enough to make her want to spend the rest of her life with me? And so you did the exchange. And so I think that one of the biggest mistakes I see so often, more from my female friends than my male friends, but you see it on both sides, is where people just get mad. They're like, why won't these brothers commit? Why won't these women do this for me? Or why won't men do that for me? And I'm like, maybe it's because you're focused so much on what you're getting and doing what you want to do, that you're not thinking for a second about how to understand what they're looking for. What makes a man, if you want to be a wife, what makes a man want you to be his wife? And the thing is, when you even bring that to the table, people get mad because they think that you're saying, oh well, I'm supposed to compromise and I'm supposed to be like kowtow to men and kiss their butts and all that. No, I believe in, honestly, I think in a marriage you kiss each other's butts to a point. I mean, you pretty much have to, you have to, kind of give in sometimes and make the compromises and the sacrifices. But your reward is, if you love the right person, the more you give, the more you will receive. So at the end of the day, you're going to get a lot more than you ever would have gotten by being selfish. Now, I'll let you get the last word. I did not mean to go on that diatribe, but that was on my mind. So, did you have any other thoughts before we take off?
Absolutely. I just wanted to add one more thing to what you were saying, and I was actually agreeing with you that you're talking about a commitment, Boyce, and a commitment basically, as it's been explained to me a lot of times, is doing what you say you were going to do, even at the moment that you really don't feel like doing it. So if you're mad and all this other stuff, that's actually quite irrelevant because you're in a commitment and you have to do what you're supposed to do, even at the moment that it doesn't feel like you're supposed to do it. Now, of course, there's obviously boundaries. We don't want to encourage women to stay in relationships where people are endangering their lives by either physically doing something to them or engaging in promiscuous behavior that also endangers the woman who they left at home. But besides those two things, which are the most common, boundaries, quite. There's really nothing that can happen that you can't overcome if you're committed, and that's the key word, is commitment. Doing what you said you're going to do, regardless of what happens. You do what you're supposed to do. And I think it can work, and that's, no matter what I've experienced or gone through, that's what I always come back to. That's who the people I look up to who've been married for double, triple, quadruple number of years than me. That's the basic thing. You have to love the person because that's what you're committed to do, and you have to hold the relationship, as something that is valuable, and it can't be thrown back and forth because of our mood swings or how we're feeling that day. It's a commitment.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. Well, it sounds like we're getting that crazy echo again a little bit, but that's okay though. We're almost done here. And I want to say thank you so much, Noma. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And everybody, this is Nomalanga Mhauli-Moses. She is an editor at Your Black World. She writes on a blog called successfulblackwoman.com. She also runs a program called Noma Unlimited, or she's the founder of an organization called Noma Unlimited that runs programs to mentor young black women. So she knows her stuff, and she does too many things to mention. And by the way, in the footnote, she happens to be the reigning Mrs. Botswana, which that's just an easy, simple little achievement. Who cares about that? So, I'm kidding. I am kidding. So thank you very much, and thank you all for checking us out at yourblackworld.com. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.